Following the meeting of heads of cabinets this morning, I can now confirm the agenda for the college meeting tomorrow in Strasbourg. The college will adopt a communication on harnessing the talent in Europe's regions. This includes initiatives to help regions in the EU avoid a talent development trap, which occurs when there are insufficient skilled workers to offset the impact of the demographic transition. This file will be presented to you by Vice President Schwitzer and Commissioner Ferreira at 3:30 tomorrow from the press room of the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Then we had to witness this weekend more brutal and barbaric Russian attacks on civilians in Ukraine. I would like to ask Peter to join me on the podium for a message concerning these terrible attacks.
Thanks, Johannes. Well, as we near the anniversary of Russia's invasion against Ukraine, more Russian missiles hit Ukrainian cities over the weekend. This includes notably a residential building, a residential apartment building in the city of Dnipro, in which at least 35 civilians, including 2 children, died. Russia continues to show its inhuman face and applies its brutal missile terror indiscriminately. Such actions constitute war crimes and must stop immediately. As the High Representative Borrell stated yesterday, there will be no impunity. The European Union strongly condemns Russia's continued heinous strikes on civilian targets in Ukraine, including energy infrastructure, and we also strongly condemn Russia increasingly targeting Ukrainian citizens in their homes by attacking residential buildings. Russia's barbaric actions only strengthen our resolve to ensure accountability and our support for Ukraine and its people.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Now I would like to ask Anita to come to the podium for an important announcement, actually of the two of us, on the entry into force of new rules to protect our critical infrastructure, both physical and digital. Anita.
Thank you. The sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines has made it very clear. Our critical infrastructure is under threat. Already 2 years ago, the Commission has proposed to significantly upgrade key legislation. The directive on a high level of cybersecurity and the directive on the resilience of critical entities. Both were proposed today and both are entering into force today. The new rules will strengthen cybersecurity and our resilience, including against terrorist attacks, insider threats or sabotage. It is important that all EU member states transpose the new rules quickly. For more information, you can check our daily news. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Anita indeed proposed together, entry into force together. This is very positive. And
lastly, I'd like to remind you that this afternoon there will be a Eurogroup meeting. Executive Vice President Dombrovskis and Commissioner Gentiloni will participate in this meeting on behalf of the Commission. The ministers will look at the state of play of the entry of Croatia into the Eurozone on the 1st of January, and they will also discuss the digital euro, the coordination of budget policy and energy support for households and companies. Ministers will also talk about re-examining economic governance in the Eurozone. Then Mr. Gentiloni will participate in the press conference, which will take place after the meeting around 7 p.m. So any questions on that subject, please say for the press conference then.
Who wants the floor? Yes, please. Please wait until it's red. Yeah, now it's working. Red is the color here, yeah.
Yes, this is Slava Postova, Bulgarian National TV. I have a question on the Bulgarian Recovery and Resilience Plan for Verle. You know, the Bulgarian authorities want to renegotiate the Bulgarian plan. I have your position, thanks for it, but I want to know if you already received the request for the renegotiation, and if such a process starts, does it mean that the payments under the current plan will stop or will be freeze? Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desislava. So
We are aware of what is happening in Bulgaria, the motion pushed by the Bulgarian parliament, the position of the president, and I can confirm that nothing has changed since Friday. So to date, we have not received a formal request from the Bulgarian authorities to revise the Bulgarian plan. More generally, in line with Article 21 of the Recovery and Resilience Facility regulation, once the Council has approved a plan, so once a Council implementing decision on a given plan has been adopted, only in exceptional cases may a Member State revise the plan and request an amendment. And then the Member State would have to demonstrate that it can no longer implement part of its plan or the entire plan due to objective circumstances. The Commission is, of course, willing to discuss the implementation of individual milestones or targets with Member States which are no longer achievable due to objective circumstances and would need to be revised. And this would require a rigorous case-by-case assessment by the Commission together with the relevant Member State. And in particular, and I want to underline this as well, is that a revised plan, of course, would still need to comply with all the assessment criteria under the Recovery and Resilience Facility regulation. And these include, for example, compliance with the 37% expenditure on climate, and also the need for the plan to address a significant set of country-specific recommendations addressed to a member state. And in the particular case of Bulgaria, this includes the recommendation of a progressive decarbonization of the Bulgarian economy. Let me just say that in terms of the current plan, the fact that it's only been approved in May of this year, the focus should be on the implementation of the plan. And the current plan contains large and significant investments and transformative sectorial reforms in the energy sector, which are fully compatible with the Repower EU goals, which, as you know, are aimed to phase out the EU's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. So, in other words, the Bulgarian plan will provide a significant contribution to its delivery. For example, the plan includes a reform to cut greenhouse gas emissions of the power sector by 40% by 2025. And these reforms go hand in hand with important investments in renewables and energy storage. Under the plan, financial support for greening the energy sector amounts to over 2 billion euros. And as you may know, Bulgaria is the most carbon-intensive economy of the EU, and clear commitments to address its country-specific recommendations on decarbonizations were a decisive element to approve the Bulgarian plan. And the RRF, together with other EU instruments, contribute more than 5 billion of financial support for the decarbonization of the Bulgarian energy system, leading to a just and fair transition and ensuring that no citizen is left behind. As to your last question, once a member state has requested or has submitted a request to revise its plan, will that then impact the pending payment requests or the overall amount which a member state is committed to? During the period of this assessment, no, of course not. So there is a whole process foreseen for the approval of a revision of a plan, which is basically a mirror process of the submission of a new plan. I hope that clarifies your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Verle. Don't think this needs a follow-up. No? This was exhaustive. More questions for Verle while she's on the podium. I see 2 questions raised in the system. Some sort of hesitation. Shandor, is your question for Verle?
My question is on sanctions, so maybe Peter.
Yeah, rather Peter. Thank you very much. We come back to you. So, no questions for Verle, then thank you so much, Verle. And looking to the room, more questions in the room before we go to the system online. No, that's not the case. Then Shandor, we come back to your question.
Yes, thanks very much. So this weekend the Hungarian government published the result of its so-called national consultation on EU sanctions against Russia. And the result is surprisingly 94% of the respondents demand that the EU is changing course in its sanctions policy towards Russia. So I would like to know, is the European Commission ready to make a proposal to, satisfy these Hungarian demands and reverse the existing sanctions towards Russia? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question, Shandor. Peter is joining me on the podium. Of course, we never speculate on future steps and future sanctions. But I think the steps undertaken so far speak for themselves. Peter.
Indeed, thank you, Shandor. We noted, of course, the national consultations and also the very low participation of the consulted citizens. But all the sanctions decisions in the EU are made by the member states in unanimity. They decide about what sanctions regime we have, when we have it, to what extent. Until now, the European Union member states have adopted 9 wide-ranging packages of sanctions against Russia for its illegal aggression against Ukraine, reflecting on EU's policy agreed by the 27 member states that we stand by Ukraine and we support Ukraine in a number of tracks: economical, financial, military, and also through putting pressure on Putin's regime through sanctions and international isolation. So the member states are constantly reviewing the sanctions, seeing if we need to respond to further escalation by Russia in this illegal aggression against Ukraine and blatant violation of UN Charter and international law. Sanctions are one of the measures we are using to react to this, because the attack against Ukraine is the attack against us, against our values. And when there will be a decision about next package or amendment of existing packages, this will be a decision for 27 member states to make in unanimity.
Thank you very much indeed. Peter, further questions for Peter? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Peter, also on sanctions, but this time on Iran. Can you confirm some media reports saying that during the next meeting, next Monday, I think, the EU foreign ministers will decide on another package of sanctions on Iran? Thank you.
Thanks, Nawab. We never pre-announce or never preempt the discussions and possible decisions by the foreign ministers when they are meeting during their monthly meetings of Foreign Affairs Council. I can only confirm that there will be a meeting of foreign affairs ministers of the EU next Monday, that Iran will be very likely on the agenda. The agenda is still in the making, still to be confirmed, but we are seeing that, unfortunately, the events in Iran are not going in the right direction. We have seen over the weekend another execution of a dual citizen, of UK Iranian citizen. There are issues. The domestic operation is still ongoing against the protesters. The issue of Iran's military assistance to Russia's illegal aggression against Ukraine is also ongoing concern. And we have said, when we already adopted sanctions against Iran in 2 rounds for its support to Russia's invasion through deliveries of drones, and through in 3 rounds of sanctions for the domestic oppression and violation of human rights, we said that we are watching the situation, evaluating the situation, and stand ready to react further if necessary. But again, these are decisions taken among the member states, and as long as there are discussions ongoing, these are confidential discussions which we are not commenting in details in public.
Thank you, Peter. Follow up.
And Peter, what about the JCPOA? Do you think it is dead now?
It's certainly not dead at this stage, but HRVP already said publicly that currently we are in a situation when the talks are stalled. And our aim is, and the aim of the HRVP and the team supporting him, because the High Representative is the coordinator of the JCPOA, the efforts are aimed to break the deadlock, break the stalemate, get out of the stalemate, but the situation is not easy, and we continue our engagement. HRVP is in regular touch with Iranian foreign minister and other participants of the JCPOA in order to move forward and have definite answers whether we proceed or whether not. But at this stage, the deal is not dead, it's stalled. The accompanying circumstances are not making it easier. Accompanying circumstances meaning the ongoing brutal oppression and repression against the protesters in Iran, the executions of the death penalties, and also Iran's military support for Russia's aggression. So these are issues which are further complicating the atmosphere and situation, but HRVP, the High Representative as the coordinator, is still engaged with his team in order to see how or if we can move forward.
Thank you very much. Further questions on Iran? Or then in the system we have several hands up. Ksenia, is your question for Peter?
It's for Peter, thank you. So Peter, you just said that any attack on Ukraine is also an attack on the EU and its values. I would like to talk about the missile attack in Dnipro in Ukraine, where a missile at least as far as we know, hit a residential building, and the death toll has now risen to 40. Should we expect any additional sanctions concerning responsible or the military, Russian military responsible for this attack and the new victims among the civil population? Thank you.
Thanks, Sani. I'm not sure if you managed to catch our proactive announcement on our position regarding exactly this brutal, inhumane attack against the residential building in Dnipro. So indeed, this is another example how Putin's regime is escalating this conflict. And as I said, the position of the European Union has always been to react to any sign of the escalation. And now we are talking about increasingly targeting civilians in their homes, after Russia decided to target the critical infrastructure important for people to survive the winter, meaning energy networks, power plants, etc. So this is another sign of the regime that they are willing to escalate or not willing to de-escalate. And in the context of the approaching anniversary of this brutal illegal aggression, this is something the EU is watching very closely. And it will be also discussed at the upcoming meeting of the foreign ministers at the upcoming FAC next Monday. But then again, every reaction by the EU needs to be agreed and decided by the 27 member states. There are discussions ongoing how to handle the continued aggression and what to do in response to the latest signs of escalation from Kremlin.
Thank you, Peter. I suggest we stay with Ukraine. Should there be further questions on Ukraine? Not here. I see two hands raised in the system. Rebecca, take good note that your question is not on foreign affairs. Waya Chen, what your question? Waya.
Sanctions on Russia. When talking about a possible 10th round of EU sanction on Russia, the Swedish presidency recently said they want to make sure that new sanctions, do not impact on EU member states more than on Russia. So is that the case that EU realized some sanctions actually hurt member states more than hurting Russia? If yes, what are those sanctions? And what are sanctions you think which are not working? Thank you.
Thanks very much. The position of the European Union has been all along the same, and the position of the member states, of course, we are not interested to adopt sanctions which are hurting us more than they are acting those ones whom we are sanctioning. That's the logic of the sanction. You adopt restrictive measures in order to show that you don't agree with violation of international law, UN Charter or human rights. And the sanctions are, of course, if you are cutting trade, if you are cutting imports, exports, the bilateral relations with a partner with whom you had a lot of to do with before, then of course there is some negative impact on our side. But one needs to bear in mind that the huge and that the biggest impact of the sanctions is on the side of those who are being sanctioned. And this is the logic and the objective of the sanctions, to inflict or to limit, in this case, to limit the ability of the Kremlin regime to finance its illegal aggression against Ukraine. Because let's not forget forget, what Russia does in Ukraine is the blatant violation of international law, of own international obligations of Russia, and its violation of UN Charter. This is very important. Our sanctions are one of the instruments which we are using to react to it. It's not the only instrument. It's not a policy. This is just an instrument accompanying all the other measures we are taking. But the impact of the sanctions is already visible because it is limiting Kremlin's ability to advance with this inhumane, barbaric, illegal aggression. Putin has not achieved any of the stated objectives he was formulating last February, and he has difficulties to sustain the deliveries to his murdering and looting army. So the aim of the sanctions is to limit the capacity of the Russian economy to sustain this aggression. And based on the available results, we see that they are working. But it's not the magic wand. It's not the magic measure that would solve everything. It's a measure which is used in addition to other measures.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Further questions for Peter? Where you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just, I think it's probably an old question because, the EU's talking points are always Russia is not ready to talk or negotiate. But, a lot of people also believe it's better to talk than no talk. Even, your standpoints, views are so different. Do you agree, or you just you want to wait until both sides come to sort of agreement, which is not possible? Is it better just to talk? I mean, then no talk.
Thank you, Eva. And of course, our approach, our policy was always to engage and to try to solve issue via dialogue. But if you fast back, if you go back in your memory to the issues we were discussing last year, exactly 1 year ago, we were discussing EU's offers and readiness to negotiate with Russia, to talk to Russia, to address all of its concerns, whether legitimate, whether justified, whether surreal, but we were ready to discuss. There were letters sent by the EU and by the NATO offering Russia the possibility to discuss the concerns Russia was raising. And what was the response? Russia dismissed, rejected, and attacked Ukraine in a blatant violation of UN Charter. And until now, Russia is not showing any willingness to talk, because there have been efforts, there have been visits, there have been phone calls, there has been outreach to Kremlin to see if we can still solve this issue, stop the aggression, stop the bloodless, the attacks against civilian infrastructure and civilians in Ukraine, and to see if we can discuss behind the negotiating table like diplomats in 21st century. Putin always refused everything. And the gradual escalation, again, go back in time on the timeline what Russia was doing, how they are escalating continuously this conflict, including using the threats of nuclear weapons. And now attacking residential buildings, killing people while they are sleeping or hiding from the cold inside their apartments. So Russia is not showing any signs of being ready for meaningful engagement in order to achieve peace in Ukraine and to stop the illegitimate campaign. The EU, Ukraine, and the international community are urging Russia to stop, are urging Russia to try to find diplomatic solution, but Putin responds with brutal force and committing more and more atrocities and brutalities in Ukraine.
Thank you, Peter. And to complete the picture, let me also refer you to the press conference of the president in Sweden, in Kiruna, on Friday afternoon, where she said, "We need to keep increasing the pressure on Russia. We will, of course, continue our unwavering support for Ukraine. We are supporting them as firmly as on day one and as long as it takes." It's online and, of course, with much more detail. There's a question from David on sanctions compliance, which I think is more done. So last check, very last check, but there's another question for Peter on sanctions, Ukraine, or any other topic that he covers. No. Then, David, I invite you to ask your question and anticipate Dan already to come to the podium.
Yeah, hi. Is this working? I have two devices to get my camera on so that I can comply, but is it possible to ask the question? I don't know if you can see me on one of the devices. I just want to ask the question. It relates to the export of Russian crude
David,
to India.
Apologies, we see a still picture of yours. So we see you, but not moving. The idea is, of course, that the interpreters can, follow your facial expressions, because this is part of...
I realise that's the idea. I mean, API has had some complaints and issues with this thing. I have two devices to try and comply with your requirement.
Maybe then try the other one then.
Yeah. The question is whether Russian crude can be exported to India and then re-exported to the EU as a petroleum product after the 5th of February. Is that compliant with EU sanctions? Because we're seeing a lot of freight movement, and that seems to be the way that Russian crude will turn into petroleum products that get to Europe. Thanks.
We understood your question, but we could not see your video. So as I said at the beginning, I invited you to connect with the other device. Then we'll get back to you bilaterally on this question. Thank you. Rebecca. Question on repower, if I understand correctly.
Thank you. My question is about Commissioner Vestager's comment in the letter about needing to boost the Repower EU to make sure that all EU countries have equal access to funding. And so I was wondering whether you would predict this additional funding for Repower EU to come from the carbon market or from common debt, or how would this be funded?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Of course, we can confirm the letter. Ariana joins me here on the podium. I'm not sure we can actually reply to your question in that detail at this point in time. But yeah, Ariana.
Thank you, Johannes. No, indeed, I'm afraid that at this stage we're in a reflection process. We have a European Council coming up where we will come up with a competitiveness proposal. You're also considering a revision to our temporary crisis framework in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine. So it is in this context that the Executive Vice President has sent a letter to member states on Friday. Indeed, the Executive Vice President has said that we need a European response that builds on three key priorities. First is accelerating the green transition. Second is eliminating barriers in the single market. And third, enabling member states to give quick and targeted support to key sectors. She has recalled all that has been done in terms of state aid so far, always in her letter, for example, reminding that as of today, 90% of state aid measures are block exempted, which means that they can be directly implemented from member states without the need of prior approval by the Commission. In addition, of course, she has recalled that we adopted a temporary crisis framework. Under the temporary crisis framework, we have approved, as of today, 672 billion of national funding so far. However, she has also said that more might be needed in the current context, and this is why she's seeking the view of member states on a number of elements, including on possibilities to further simplify the process of state approval, possible additional measures to accelerate the green transition, and third, the need to balance support for production in certain types of sectors which are key to the green transition with the possible risk of fragmentation on the single market. And I believe that the comments you're referring to are meant in this context, but at this stage we do not have further elements to provide. Of course, when we will have a proposal on the table, we will make it known also to you, of course.
Indeed, many things indeed, Ariana, and this is of course in the context of the European response to the IRA and also the work that we do on competitiveness, the plan the President had mapped out already in Bruges and in the European Parliament, and also again on Friday in Corona in Sweden. Refer you again to the transcript online. And as Ariana said, we're consulting member states. The President is today in Paris. She's meeting President Macron. So you have to see this all in that context. Yeah, further questions for Ariana while she's here? No, that was not a hand. Okay, nothing in the system. Thank you very much, Ariana. Further questions for us today? No? Well, if that's not the case, then I thank you all for your participation and I wish you a nice day. And we are having a press conference tomorrow at 3:30 from Strasbourg, and we're back with the midday on Wednesday. Have a nice day. Bye.